Hello and welcome to the Power Pod. I'm your host, Matthew Cohen, and today I have the pleasure of welcoming back onto the show Ernst van Zyl, the head of public relations for AfriForum. Ernst, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
Good morning, Matthew. As we were talking off air, things are just moving so fast at the moment here at the tail end of 2025. But 2025 has just been a hectic year in general for South Africa on the geopolitical stage, but also what's happening just internally in regards to politics and the reactions that there have been to what's happening internationally. So I think there's a lot to discuss.
No, you're definitely right. It really seems to have been non-stop, especially with, everything coming through the media. But what I think really needs to be given the spotlight right now is what you at AfriForum have been doing, because you've recently released quite a crucial report. For those who might not know, it's called The World Must Know 2025, The Continued Persecution of Minority Communities in South Africa. Now, Ernst, it's so relevant what you've just said, because I'm going to quote something that you actually said during your announcement of the report, which is that there are decades where nothing happens and there are weeks where decades happen. And that's definitely where we are at the moment, as you rightfully pointed out. So I'd like to start off by asking you, Ernst, this is the third iteration of the report, if I'm not mistaken. So why now? What was the specific reason that you felt that now was the right time to give this crucial update?
So it's always tempting to give like some explanation for why doing something at a certain time, making your explanation a lot more dramatic and cinematic than it actually played out. So the story behind these types of reports is the fact that AfriForum has already published two of them in the past. First one being in 2020, and then in 2022 another one, or I think it was. Yes, at the end of 2022, and then now in 2025. And the reason we already planned that we're going to be researching and publishing this report at the end of the year, very early on this year, and it was just because we came to the conclusion AfriForum had not published a World Must Know report in a long while, and a lot has happened since. And it just so happens that it really came at a very valuable time, seeing as 2025 has just been a year of denialism from so many people, whether that be commentators or people close to the government or within the South African government itself. The conversation has been the conversation surrounding many issues in South Africa this year has been very unnuanced. It's been pretty much if you think X, Y, and Z are real issues, then you're spreading misinformation. That's been the mantra that we've been hearing. These issues do not exist, end quote. So when it comes to the issues that are highlighted in this report, these are mostly issues that aren't even just downplayed by the South African government and its allies. These are issues that are outright denied the existence of by the South African government. Just to name two, the first one being the race laws in South Africa. We saw just this in the past week or so, we saw the South African government's official X account replying to people, pointing out that South Africa has these race-based laws. And in their words, there are no race-based laws in South Africa, which is just a stunning denial of a reality that we all know is the case. And these are widespread race-based laws. And then the other example would be farm murders and the incitement of violence regarding farm murders. We saw the president of South Africa in 2018 when he was talking to a journalist in New York. He was talking to a Bloomberg journalist, and he was asked about farm murders in South Africa. And the president said, in his words, there are no murdering of farmers or white farmers in South Africa. There are no land grabs in South Africa, end quote. And it's just, and he's never retracted that comment. He's never apologized for that. And he wasn't fact checked. The media just wrote some puff pieces on quote unquote what the president meant to say when he denied these issues exist. So that just gives you a little bit of for those who maybe are not as immersed in what's been happening for the past few months in South Africa, that gives you a little bit of an idea of how the government has been reacting to legitimate issues being pointed to, not just by people within South Africa, but from abroad as well. More specifically, the U.S. State Department and the Trump administration highlighting many of these issues, including the race-based laws and farm murders and incitements of violence like Kill the Boer. So the whole point and the timing of this report was to ensure that the public out there has the information to be able to counter this propaganda that these issues do not exist, that these issues are just misinformation, that these issues don't matter in any way and are inconsequential, to quote one of these pro-regime propagandists. So that's the reason, is to arm people with the facts. And we are currently producing a video series summing up the report as well. And in each one of those video series episodes, I always remind the audience, don't just blindly believe what AfriForum says, research what we say. And we made that very easy for the audience in the fact that every single claim in the report that is made is linked to at least one source, primary source, where we're getting that information from. So if you're reading the report and you come across a claim in the report where you think to yourself that can't possibly be true, then you just go to the bibliography or the sources page at the end of the report, and you can see where AfriForum found the information to make that claim. And then you can see for yourself. So I always encourage people to double check, even if information is coming from a source that you trust.
Of course. And I would also just like to make it known to our viewers today that anybody who would like to see the report, there will be a link to it in the description box below. So please be sure to check it out, because of course we're going into the report here as well. But if you want to get the full extent of all the knowledge that AfriForum is sharing with you, make sure to check out the report. So, Ernst, I definitely would like to get into some of the details in the report, but just before that, you mentioned something pretty interesting, which is the fact, rather something very relevant, which is the fact that the government, especially on its X account, seems to be having this massive denial. And in addition to claiming that there's no race-based laws in South Africa, they also seem to love to be responding to people with the line, please stop disseminating misinformation.
I remember now that you quoted that line, after quoting that line, it just reminded me that you were one of the prominent people that they were responding to with that exact line. I think their reply to you was one of the first times they had employed that robotic line, if I remember correctly.
Right. That's exactly the point. And as you pointed out at the time, this is just seems like a bot account, but it brings me to an important point, which is the fact that we've seen a massive attack against AfriForum and solidarity by the ANC. And we understand that the ANC might still be in this mindset that it runs the country on its own. It has done it for 30 years prior to the GNU. But what I'd like to know is, has AfriForum received support or even just a little bit of vocalization of what's going on from other political parties or civil society organizations or anyone in the media?
So there's been a lot of support, firstly, from our members and our just supporters in the general public. You see it a lot on social media. I always say with quite a bit of relief that I don't have to fight all AfriForum's battles. Luckily, we have a large amount of our supporters online that will point out the lies employed against AfriForum and will stand up for us and for the truth. And then also a lot of organizations in civil society in South Africa have been doing fantastic work to ensure that AfriForum is not alone in this fight. Organizations like the Free Market Foundation, organizations like the Institute of Race Relations. There's been I could sit here and name all of them, but I'd rather keep the list limited. Otherwise, I'm going to leave out one or two or three, and they're going to be left out. So I'll name the two main ones that are off the top of my head, but there's a lot of other organizations doing good work as well. Sakeliga as well. Lex Libertas of Aaron's Roots as well. So when it comes to particularly the support that we've seen, it's mainly from the general public and from civil society. There have been political parties that have called out the South African government for its own lies and propaganda. The Freedom Front Plus did that earlier this year. little bit more of a muted response from the Democratic Alliance. I haven't really seen them attack this line of misinformation. They've actually been using the term misinformation for the past year as well, disappointingly. But that's currently where we stand. The most explicit rebuttal or refutation of the government's propaganda probably coming from the Freedom Front Plus, if I had to think of a political party. A political party that's this year been carrying so much water for the ANC, it's insane, has been Action SA, specifically through their main spokesperson, Herman Mashaba on X, who's just completely seemed to have drank the race madness Kool-Aid, just spewing anti-Afrikaner, anti-white hatred, just rabidly supporting these race-based laws, expropriation without compensation, all of these policies he seems to now be a fan of, and attacking AfriForum and Solidarity as treasonous and traitors for simply saying that these policies are a threat to the constitutional rights of not just Afrikaners, but all South Africans. I mean, if the government has the power to take your property, that is a threat to any South African that owns property, which is every South African. Because the threat to private property rights contained in the Expropriation Act is not just limited to farmland. It encompasses property, which means if you own property in South Africa, the Expropriation Act gives the government the power to expropriate that. If you're listening to this program on a phone or a tablet or a computer or whatever, that item that you're using to listen to this show at this very moment is your property that can be expropriated, just to really emphasize that point.
Of course. And you've actually just brought up one of the main details I wanted to bring up in the report, which was EWC, the expropriation without compensation. So we've seen quite a lot of misinformation around that. Not to go and coin the ANC and the DA's term, but it is what it is. It's misinformation.
Matthew, I'm not that old, but when I was growing up, you just called people liars. You didn't use all these fancy terms. But now it seems if it's just not sufficient enough to be calling people liars anymore. Misinformation is probably the buzzword of 2025. Doesn't mean the word doesn't exist. Doesn't mean the word doesn't have a definition. So you're welcome to use it. I just find it funny that in 2025 now misinformation is this big buzzword, but before that we just called people liars. A bit more simple.
100%. And not to detract too much from the main topic of conversation, but that's actually quite an important point you raised, because we have this tendency in South Africa to sugarcoat things, We can't just call things change, it's now transformation, And then in another famous one is GBV, gender-based violence, when in other parts of the world it's known as femicide or it's known as sexual assault. You call it what it is. So it seems that misinformation is another way of just avoiding the real term, like what it actually is, which is just lying. But on that note, we have this important issue, which is this nil compensation, where the government seems to think that we don't quite understand the English language and that nil compensation doesn't mean zero compensation. So that's the one sort of issue I'd like us to address. But then the other one, which I think is also quite important here, Ernst, is that there seems to be a lot of these supporters of EWC who will go and say things like, well, South Africa wouldn't be the only country in the world that does this, and that America also has it, they've got eminent domain. And so what really is different between what America's doing and what South Africa's doing? So what would your response to these types of arguments be?
Well, on the topic of expropriation without compensation and the ANC's love affair with the idea, there's just so much to unpack, but I'll keep it as brief as possible. I mean, this is a policy position that's been coming a long while with the ANC. It really started becoming prominent in 2018 already, when the ANC tried to amend the South African Constitution to remove the private property rights clause in the Constitution. Long story short, in a very ironic twist of fate, the far left in South Africa, even farther left in the ANC, actually ironically saved private property rights through their own hubris. So what happened was the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters, like the far left of the far left in South Africa, didn't think just allowing the government to be able to confiscate people's property for nothing was going far enough. So they said they're not going to be supporting the amendment to the constitution in parliament because they want the state to be the custodian of all land in South Africa. So not just have the power, it should just off the bat expropriate everything all at once and own all land in South Africa. So they didn't support the amendment of the constitution. And then the ANC's plot there failed, as I said, ironically, because the far left thought they could get even more. And in the end, that then failed. But then right after that failed, there are two reactions in 2018. I think the process was started in 2018 and then it concluded in 2021, if I remember correctly. But I'm speaking under correction there. Sometimes the timelines get a bit fuzzy. But anyway, at the end of that process of trying to amend the constitution, then failing, then Minister of Justice Ronald Lamola came out and he said, okay, well, in his words, this attempt to make expropriation without compensation possible has now clearly failed. We will now look at alternative ways to make it possible. In his words, through legislation like the Expropriation Act. So that's the whole point of the Expropriation Act. It's a backdoor for the ANC to make their dream of expropriation without compensation possible. And in the years since, there's been multiple times where the ANC has just blatantly said, our mission is to make expropriation of property without compensation possible. Multiple times, Deputy President Paul Mashatile, President Cyril Ramaphosa. On that question of null and zero, Paul Mashatile, the Deputy President of South Africa, was asked that question by a journalist. The journalist asked him, this null and zero and no compensation, does that mean the same thing to you? And the Deputy President's answer was, as far as I understand it, null means no, and that means you don't pay for the land that you take. So, I mean, it's just such a clear admission, like, the party in power understands null to mean no. They see it as synonyms. So null compensation and no compensation in their mind is the same thing. I don't care about how many little nuanced legal arguments you can make, like we're on a microscopic level. This is how these minute differences between the two terms. No, but maybe it's easier for me to see through the facade because in Afrikaans, zero literally translates to null. So in my home language, zero just means null. So if you were to take a sentence like zero compensation and no compensation don't mean the same thing, and you translate it directly into Afrikaans, the sentence would go no compensation and no compensation and no compensation don't mean the same thing. So when it comes to particularly the Expropriation Act, the latest, what we have now is it was signed into law last year, at the end of last year by President Ramaphosa, only announced this year in 2025. It was one of the catalyst events for this whole diplomatic crisis with the United States, because then very shortly after the announcement that South Africa is launching this attack against private property rights, that's when Donald Trump made his first post on Truth Social about South Africa, and that's when the government really got into the crosshairs of the Trump administration. I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's clearly linked to the fact that, for example, a trade agreement like AGOA is absolutely a foundational principle to the AGOA trade agreement is that your country respects private property rights. So I think that's a very clear connection. And that's where we are now. The government has granted itself that power, but next year in 2026, there's going to be a massive court case with AfriForum and other organizations and parties taking it on. It's going to be, I think, in March 2026 is going to be when we appear in court. It's going to be an absolutely colossal battle for private property rights. But the latest comment, and this is included in AfriForum's report, the latest comment just again demonstrating how private property rights are under threat in South Africa came from Paul Mashatile, the Deputy President, just a few weeks ago, when he said that the ANC remains committed to expropriation without compensation and that expropriation efforts need to be accelerated and intensified. And this is coming from a political party that's still idolizes Robert Mugabe as a hero. I mean, you can't really make the argument that you are the staunch defender of private property rights and believe in private property rights, but at the same time, the dictator that probably committed the worst violation of private property rights in the 21st century, that dictator is also your hero simultaneously as a party. I mean, that doesn't compute. When the ANC says that they are committed to expropriation of private property without compensation, and they view Robert Mugabe as a revolutionary hero, then I tend to believe them.
Of course. And what's actually really interesting about what you said, especially when Ramaphosa took his trip and praised Mugabe during his speech, I think what's so important about this is that the ANC just continues to implicate themselves further. And I think it's so unfortunate that you have people who still seem to defend this ridiculous notion. Not too long ago, we had the Minister of Public Works, Dean McPherson, who is of the DA, who tried to justify how nil compensation doesn't exactly mean zero compensation. Now, this isn't an attack against him specifically. I don't know what his thought process was, but this kind of behavior and this kind of defending the governments at all costs is really not helping the situation at all. But before we continue, Ernst, I'd just like to clarify. So this court case that is going to happen, we've already seen certain political parties like the DA decide to lodge their court case. So is this an entirely separate lawsuit that's going to be done?
No, this court case is going to include all of the organizations and parties and individuals that are launching court cases against the Expropriation Act. So it will, as far as I understand it, will include the Freedom Front Plus, the Democratic Alliance, AfriForum, I think Solidarity as well. I can't remember if they're also going to have a unique court approach or if they're just going to support AfriForum. But yeah, and the Free Market Foundation as well. There's just going to be a whole collection of organizations and parties all taking on the Expropriation Act, I think simultaneously part of the same court case. But then there's also going to be a coalition of evil that's going to be fighting on the side of wanting to abolish private property rights. And that's going to be the opposition to this attempt to defend private property rights. But it's going to be a massive court case. I'm going to be there. I'm going to document it all. I'll make sure people are up to date on what's going on every day in court. But yeah, it's just reassuring to know that there is a coalition willing to fight for private property rights, even though many of the coalition members, it's not an official coalition and they're not coming in at the issue from the same angle. But we're all fighting for the same thing, and that is to protect private property rights in South Africa, which is one of the foundational constitutional rights that you can have. If the government can threaten you by taking everything that you have, I mean, that then they can pretty much destroy any form of dissent. They have almost total control over anyone in the country because they can take any property from you that they want. It's incredibly disturbing and a high risk leverage that you're giving the government over the people of the country. So it is an absolutely fundamental fight. I would say the right to private property rights is only second to the right to freedom of expression. I think freedom of expression just edges out right to private property in regards to how important that right is to you.
Of course. So, yes, on that note, it certainly is a pivotal court case. And I definitely wish AfriForum and its partners all the best in this fight, because this really is a fight for the sovereignty of South Africans and really the future of the country. And this is not an over-dramatization, as you've pointed out. This is a fundamental and arguably the most important right which is at stake. But as we've seen, as you've outlined in the report, Ernst, this is not the only sort of right that seems to be under attack by the ANC government. We've seen the Bela Act being passed into law, and unfortunately that presents a massive threat to the Afrikaans language being a learning medium in schools. And again, we've seen how just as was the case with the EWC, we have these supporters of it. So I'm going to play devil's advocate here, Ernst, and say I actually did a bit of research on this, and I see that a lot of these supporters seem to like to say that the Bela Act is good because, in their words, it makes it compulsory for grade R students to attend school. So it means that obviously more children will they'll have it will be mandatory for them to receive an education, which is a good thing. And then it also expands government control over admissions and language policies. So in their minds, well, because it will be more centralized planning, I'll leave my personal feelings like that out. But in their minds, because it involves that, they would think, okay, well, at least the standard can be raised across the board. So what would your response be to people that still seem to be adamant in their support of the Bela Act, particularly when it comes to Afrikaans?
I think it's important that we steel man the opposition in regards to what their arguments are. So I think that's important that you've done that there. But the responses there, Law, firstly, if an act has many different aspects to it and some of them are positive, that's like me making a stew or some type of dish for you and saying, well, there's good thing, there's vegetables in it, there's some meat in it, but there's also a poison tablet in there, but that's fine, just don't worry about it. The poison tablet is only 5% of the stew, so it probably isn't that big of a deal. And that's how a lot of very destructive government legislation is pushed through. It has some good elements to it, and then they just fixate on the good elements and tell you to ignore the absolutely destructive elements. Particularly that clause in regards to the centralized power that it gives to the state over admissions and language policies. What that effectively does is it takes away power from school governing bodies, those people that are from the community where that school is, that know the community, know the needs of it, know the values of that community, know how a school can best serve the community where it is. And it takes away the power from those school governing bodies from a community level to a state level. And it tells the state it gives the state the power to then decide what's best for that community, which has never turned out well throughout history and in the present. There's just so many examples. And particularly in regards to admissions and language policies, you then put this power into the hands of politicians like Panyaza Lesufi, who is a vehement anti-Afrikaans bigot, who said that, a few years ago, he visited an Afrikaans school and he was quoted as saying that he was disgusted to find that all the students and teachers at the school were Afrikaans and that the medium of education was Afrikaans there. And you're giving that type of disgusting politician the power then to decide what admission and language policies a school should have. Well, the result is very obvious what's going to happen. Politicians who hate Afrikaans are then going to tell Afrikaans schools, well, you have to start admitting English students as well, which not only causes a massive just administrative problems for the school, because now they have to hire English teachers, they have to do their announcements and school assemblies all in dual language, all of their printouts need to be dual language, all of their exams. It just completely disrupts the entire administration of that school, almost makes it in many cases impossible for the school to run itself effectively. And then what we've seen happen at the universities is going to happen at these schools, and that is when the school has a certain percentage of English students, the demand is going to come, well, we need to turn this school into an English school now. It makes no sense to keep a dual medium. It's too expensive. It's too complicated. It's causing too much problems. Let's just turn it into an English school now. And that usually happens long before 51% are English, but when let's say, for argument's sake, when 51% of the school becomes English, then that call just becomes too powerful. And then the school turns into it goes from a single medium Afrikaans school to a dual medium school to a single medium English school. And this pattern has been playing out at every single Afrikaans medium university in this country over the past few years. I saw it play out at Stellenbosch while I was there, which is supposedly this dual medium university. No, it's now officially just an English university in all but official documentation. It still proclaims to be a multilingual university, but it is, for all intents and purposes, de facto an English university now. And I saw the same arguments being made. Oh, it's just a small amount of English. We're just going to be doing dual medium. This is the new status quo. No, that is the transition period. The transition period is dual medium, and then it transitions to single medium English. And then, Afrikaans students has nowhere to, get, Afrikaans medium education. And the evil thing about it is every single study on this issue shows that when you are taught in your home language, your performance in your subject increases, and it is good for students at the very least in primary school to get education in their mother tongue. But it's even better if they can get it primary school and high school and tertiary. And the thing is, this is the decision that the ANC made in the 90s. There are two options. They could either develop the other languages of South Africa in the same way that Afrikaans was developed from a basic language, just a casual language, to a language that you do your PhD in at the highest level. They could have chosen that path, but that would have been difficult. So they didn't do that. They just chose the path of let's standardize everything into English, which has been incredibly destructive for South Africa. So it's the onslaught against mother tongue education is not just an onslaught against Afrikaans, even though Afrikaans is particularly being singled out. It is an onslaught against the very idea of home language education, which is a net positive for anyone, whether that be someone who speaks Afrikaans at home or Zulu or Sotho or whatever language in South Africa. They are being denied the opportunity to be educated in their home language, which has a detrimental effect. I think it has such a detrimental effect that is one of the major factors why South Africa is performing so badly in almost all educational metrics, is the fact that the majority of South Africans are not receiving education in their home language, which is a major detriment to them. But yeah, that's in short the Bela Act's threat to minority communities in particular, but to South Africa at large as well.
Of course. And what's really interesting to me, Ernst, is you mentioned how there was that study conducted. And I remember the Department of Basic Education commissioning it. And my big question was, why do you even need a study? Because in my mind, it's just common sense. You know, you're a multilingual, I'm a multilingual. I'd say most South Africans are. And it's obvious that if you learn in your mother tongue, it's going to be easy because you don't have to sit in class and process everything in a foreign language and then try to make sense of it to yourself and then, you know, use that to finally start learning the concept. You can just learn the concept.
Yeah, you're learning that new concept in the language that you think. And I mean, maths was difficult enough for me in school. I don't want to even think about what it would have been like if I had to be taught maths in English as well. It would have just added such a new level of difficulty. So it just makes sense to promote mother tongue education. And it is possible. It's not an impossible task. I mean, there are blueprints of languages that were developed from a basic level to the highest level in the previous century. Afrikaans was one of them. Hebrew was another one. And there was, I think there was two Asiatic or Eastern languages as well. That I think there's 4 or 5 examples of the blueprint of languages being taken from a level where it's not at the highest academic level and within a century being developed to the highest level. And it's just through commitment. People saying, well, we're going to do this. We're going to be committed to developing this language, building this language, taking it from level 1 to level 10. And it's possible. Like I said, the blueprints are there. So there isn't even an excuse for the ANC to say, oh, well, it can't be done. Like, no, it has been done. And it's metaphorically open source. You can just go look at how these languages in the 20th century achieved it. Afrikaans being one of them. So they can use a local example of a language being developed in that way, and that can be applied to the other languages in South Africa, but they chose the opposite.
Of course. And that actually, the fact that they refuse to acknowledge this, Ernst, also points out to another problem, right? Which is that at the moment, and anybody who doesn't believe me, you can Google this, there's a massive problem in South African schools, especially in basic education, foundation phase teaching, which is that children are struggling to read for meaning. And much like you pointed out, you know, as soon as you're having to learn in a language that's not your own, that's causing a problem. And again, this isn't to say that this is every single student's problem. Some people need extra special assistance, others don't, but it's certainly a contributing factor. And much like you mentioned, Afrikaans is one of those languages that's been developed that it is able to be studied on university level. They developed the language further. In Hebrew, if you wanted, if somebody went to study in a university in Israel, you can study all the way up till PhD level in pure Hebrew. And I mean, from what I remember, with Solidariteit's university being constructed, it will be the same concept there. So as you rightfully pointed out, it's about a commitment, and the government just seems to refuse to acknowledge that and rather look for the easy way out. But what I'd actually like to point out, Ernst, is that the Bela Act and EWC seem to have been pretty heavily covered in the media, right? But something that really didn't receive a lot of exposure, which you pointed out in this report, is a recent study by the United States, which was released in August. So the US State Department's Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labor found that the human rights situation in South Africa has significantly deteriorated. And I'm not sure what your media coverage was like at the time, but for me as a consumer, I hardly saw any information about this. And in fact, the only thing that I saw about it was actually in foreign media. I think it was US media, nothing in South Africa. And so I wanted to know, Ernst, if for the viewers, you could just elaborate on this study, because this is a crucial piece of information that we've all been missing out on.
Right. So that's once again, it just shows the major problems we have in mainstream media in South Africa, is that it has selective reporting. So, I mean, there is something called lie by omission, where you just don't cover a story and that's as good as a lie. And this report that the State Department published earlier this year was a incredibly important report, because it made some very damning findings, and I'm not surprised that many media outlets didn't cover it in South Africa, because it kind of shatters the ANC's narrative. Now, it's open for everyone to go read. It's not a report behind a paywall or where only some people have access. You can either go to AfriForum's report and find it in the bibliography, or you can just, I think, if you search a US State Department South Africa report, you'll find it. It really is highlighting the issues that AfriForum and Solidarity and many other organizations and individuals have been pointing out. The Kill the Boer chant and incitement of violence against minority groups in South Africa, racially discriminatory policies by the South African government, threats, intimidation and threats, and police investigations into government critics and those who dare to criticize or expose the South African government. It points to the economic freedom fighters and correctly identifies them as a radical extremist left-wing party in South Africa that is not being condemned by the ANC when they chant "Kill the Boer, kill the farmer." And the overall conclusion of the report was that the human rights situation in South Africa has significantly deteriorated, not just specifically for Afrikaners or white South Africans. In general, the situation has deteriorated. But it mentions issues like farm murders being one of the major issues that have contributed to this conclusion being reached. So that's one of the main sources that I thought was very important to include in our report, for exactly the same reason that you pointed out there, that it didn't get a lot of coverage in South Africa, because it's a report filled with hate facts. It's a report filled with just politically inconvenient information. And that seems to be swept under the rug these days in South Africa. While AfriForum's approach to this is let's speak the truth about South Africa and the South African government, the good and the bad, not just the good, or not just that information that is convenient for the current narrative coming from the ANC. And we saw that as well now with G20, where when Solidarity put up their banner a few weeks ago, the banner that correctly states an objective fact that South Africa is the most race-regulated country in the world, with over 145 race-based laws. There is another country in the world with that many race-based laws, as far as I'm aware. I've not been pointed to one. But then what was the government's response? Well, a government who has facts on their side would simply have responded with the facts, saying, well, here's the reality, here's the counterpoint that South Africa is not the most race regulated. Actually, it's a non-racial country. That would have been a calm response from the government. But that's not what they did. The government rushed out and illegally tore down Solidarity's banner, and then Solidarity went to court and won the court case, demonstrating that the government acted illegally in their censorship. But also it didn't work, because then the Streisand effect kicked in. Not only did Solidarity put up 38 new banners and posters all across the South Africa, particularly in Gauteng, but also the photograph of the banner that was torn down went viral on X and on social media. It was covered on YouTube and Facebook and everywhere. Whereas maybe a few 10,000 people would have driven by it and seen it and internalized or taken in what they were reading on the banner. Now 500,000 on this post, 400,000 on that post, 300,000 on that post. Millions of people around the world then saw this banner and got it a lot more exposure than it would have gotten if the ANC had just reacted in a calm way. But they can't, because they know that AfriForum and Solidarity are speaking the truth. If a government that knows it has truth on its side doesn't have to resort to censorship, I think that's just a clear lesson we see all around the world and throughout history.
Of course. And as you rightfully pointed out, that Streisand effect really brought a lot of exposure and success, I would say, to the campaign, more so than if the government hadn't responded at all. So they really seemed to do the PR work on your behalf, or at least, well, on Solidarity's behalf, Ernst. But as you pointed out, and this is another piece of the report, we have this Kill the Boer song. And unfortunately, something that we've seen time and again is, no matter how controversial it is and no matter how explicit it is for the world to see the violent rhetoric, it just seems that the South African government will do nothing against it. And we did see how the court ruled against Kill the Boer being unconstitutional. So what I'd like to know, Ernst, is, will AfriForum continue the fight on that stance, on that issue? And more so, do you think that there is maybe a solution? Because it just seems that, if the government just refuses outright to condemn it, even with international pressure, and you have the court itself ruling against it, what other recourse do we have for this?
So firstly, let's on that note that point of the government and the president specifically refusing to condemn the Kill the Boer chant. So earlier, it's been sung and chanted many times this year, one of the most prominent being on Human Rights Day earlier this year. And after that, AfriForum wrote a letter to the president urging him to condemn this chant. And then the response from the president's spokesperson was, the president will do no such thing. He was a lot more mute and quiet when he was confronted in the Oval Office, and he was locked in a room with President Trump. Then he wasn't as defiant in saying, no, I will not condemn it. But he also didn't condemn it really. He gave this wishy-washy response of, oh, well, we don't sing it, whatever. But what stood out to me was the fact that the only real, let's steel man it, the only real argument that has some substance, or that looks like it has some substance, is when people said, oh, well, but the courts ruled that it's not hate speech, so how can he condemn it? Well, the answer is simple. There's many things in South Africa that are deeply wrong, but not specifically illegal. So, for example, racism is not technically illegal in South Africa. You can make racist comments online, and if someone does not lodge a crimen injuria complaint against you, then you're not going to go to prison it's not illegal, even though it is deeply wrong to make racist comments. A crimen injuria case, which we've seen against people who've made racist comments, is not technically racism being illegal. It is, as I understand it, attacking someone or damaging someone's dignity being illegal on a individual level. So racism is not technically illegal in South Africa, but you can condemn racism. The president has done it many times. Many politicians have done it. I can do it now. Ernst van Zyl, condemn racism is wrong. But nobody then is going to tell me, oh, but Ernst, remember, how can you do that? It's not technically illegal. How is it possible for you to condemn it? It's easy to condemn things that are wrong. They don't have to be illegal for them to be wrong. The same goes for just immoral behavior towards your friends or towards your colleagues. There's many immoral behaviors that are not technically illegal, but that you can clearly condemn and easily condemn as wrong. And the same goes for kill the Boer. Just because the court said it's not illegal to try and kill the Boer doesn't mean that the president is now bound, that he can't say this, even though the court has found that this chant is not illegal. I still am going to take the firm stance that it is immoral and wrong, and that I will never encourage anyone to do it, and I discourage people to do it. That's the easiest thing in the world to do, but he doesn't. He refuses to do it. So that's on the point of the Steelman argument that, well, the court ruled that it's not illegal, so therefore it's impossible to condemn. No, it is very possible and easy to condemn. But then also, what is there to do? Well, there's only really two options. On the one side, you can just accept accept that this is the end and there's nothing to do, and you can just roll over and give up. But AfriForum and those against this type of incitement of violence are not going to do that. So the only other option is to look at what other avenues are there to put pressure on the South African government and to stop this type of incitement. And the one option that is still open is the fact that to take this battle internationally, to ensure that more voices internationally condemn it, more voices internationally stand against it, and that has a very good chance of bringing about change in South Africa. And the other option, then alongside that, you can walk and chew gum at the same time, is to accept that even though there are politicians inciting violence against minorities, that doesn't mean that you can't take your safety into your own hands by getting involved in a farm patrol or a neighborhood watch, or ensure that you are within the confines of the law able to protect yourself and your family if you were to become the target of hate crimes or this type of violent rhetoric. So there's many things still to be done. In a perfect world, we would have a moral president that would just simply say this chant is wrong and I condemn it. But unfortunately, we don't have that type of president. We have a cowardly president who cares more about the feelings of the radical fringe left-wing EFF than about the actual safety of citizens in his country who are targeted by this type of rhetoric.
Of course, I couldn't have put it better. And on that note, Ernst, before we wrap up, I'd like to know, do you have a message for the viewers specifically? Is there a call to action that you could share? What can they do in order to basically continue this fight and make sure that this sort of damage to the country can be stopped?
So there's two very important things that you can do, but it's not very dramatic or exciting, but it makes a big difference. And the one is simply keep speaking the truth. Don't be afraid to speak the truth. Don't be deterred by those who try to silence or intimidate you, even though that is very difficult if you are being targeted. I mean, we're seeing now someone like the Kifness, David Scott, being the victim, him even and his parents being the victim of a campaign against them to target them and harass them and try to silence them, simply for him taking very, very just like vanilla stances that don't match the far left sensibilities. But when it comes to particularly what you can do, one, yes, continue speaking the truth even when it's difficult. And then secondly, this is on a smaller scale, make sure that you're armed with the facts. Read things like AfriForum's The World Must Know report and other fact-based analysis, and make sure you have the facts on your side. And then people can also, they can find the report at www.theworldmustknow.co.za, and there they can download the report for free, and then they can share it. They can make videos about it. They can do whatever they want with the contents. All that's important to AfriForum is that we arm people with the facts. And I think this report achieves that.
Of course. In fact, I'm going to do one even better. I'm going to include the link in the description box below, just to make it even more accessible. So anybody who's watching this, I implore you to go check out the report. I understand that a lot of the time these reports might seem complicated, but this is a very well written, easy to understand, user-friendly report. It's only about 7 pages, if I'm not mistaken, Ernst.
And
So
it's
yes,
written
I
in chronological
definitely.
order, so you're just reading it from case to case. You're just reading, well, this happened and this happened and this happened. It's not like it's not a jungle that you have to take a machete to and try to chop through. It really reads up. It was written with the intention to make it accessible for everyone and to not make it dry and boring and over reliance on theory or jargon or whatever. It really is just an account of what's happened in 2025 regarding these issues.
Right. And also important to note is that every single thing, as you pointed out, has a source. There's no made up information here. So if anybody wants to make sure that they are as well informed as possible with hard facts, this is the report to read. Go check it out. And on that note, Ernst, I'd like to thank you for coming on the show. It's great to speak to you as always. Thanks to you and AfriForum for everything you're doing, and the best of luck for that all-important court case early next year.
Thank you very much, Matthew. And we'll be chatting again soon. Thanks for the platform. I just want to correct one thing. There is one subjective part in the report, and that's the conclusion. That's the only part that's not linking to sources. It's just looking at the data or the information that we've presented here. This is AfriForum's conclusion. That's the only subjective part of the entire document.
No, that's all right. It's still informed. So long as it's based on your findings, I don't see any problem with that. I don't think we're going to be calling it misinformation just yet. At least not on this platform, Ernst.
Well, that's the type of treatment that we've been subjected to by a lot of quote unquote fact checkers. They'll see there's out of the 5,000 words, there's a 200-word paragraph at the end of the document that's subjective and doesn't have a source because it's just an analysis, and they'll say with this a speculation full document, they'll use that type of language. But but thank you very much, Matthew, for the interesting conversation, and thank you for the platform.
Only a pleasure. So as I mentioned before, please go check out the report, link to which is in the description box below, and subscribe to the channel for more content. Until next time, I'm Matthew Cohen, and this is the Power Pod.